Hi, everyone. Welcome to Creative Convos. It's the show with Catholic authors. We usually bring back people from our podcast to chat about themes of the month or our genre challenges. So welcome to Katy. Welcome to Verity. Good to have you with us.
Hi, good to be here.
Great to be here.
So we've had Katy several times now on our Creative Convos. She's becoming a pillar of the community. Well, she's a mentor now, so it's good to have you, Katy. Verity, her interview only just landed, well, as of this interview, when this airs. So pleased to have us come back and chat about how to think about genres, especially the genre for today, which is Mythic Tales. And I've had people reach out and say, the heck is a Mythic Tale? I mean, I get mythology. Can I submit a fantasy story to this thing? You know, because we're also running a contest on this. So I'm going to try to define what a mythic tale is and why I've used that phrase. Then we'll chat about our favorite sort of mythic heroic stories, and that it's not only mythology, it's more than that. What counts as heroism in writing stories, you know, and in the stories that we really enjoy. Lastly, tropes to encourage and tropes to avoid. So Kate is our hero in coming up with those. So looking forward to whatever comes to mind. So it's kind of an informal, fun conversation. So I'm going to provide a quick definition of what I think Mythic Tales is and ask you ladies to kind of riff off of that or share what you think. So the reason why I picked the phrase or the title Mythic Tales is it's part of a series of thinking a journey that we're going on with CatholicAuthor in our first year together. And we started with fairy tales because I really see fairy tales as a kind of story that we tell to form identity. And our identity is not just something we sit in a corner and make up by ourselves. It comes out of, or it emerges, or it gets created out of contact with other people, contact with our culture, and especially contact with the supernatural or the paranormal or the preternatural, whatever you call it. So fairies, angels, elves, trolls, all of that stuff, God. So fairy tales are about forming your identity, and then mythology, in the broadest sense of mythology, is about what you do with your identity. So if your culture says this is what defines purpose, and this is what adults do, and this is what makes a good person, mythology, I think more often than not, is about the stories of people trying to live that out. Now I know who I am. What am I going to do with that? So in the First World West, where most of us are, we aren't really sure we have any mythology anymore. Ancient Egypt had it. The Sumerians had it. The Vikings had it. Indians probably still have it. What do we have? And I think we're writing it. We're creating it now. It's coming together now. And that's why Mythic Tales is a great catch-all for tales of heroism. So Star Wars counts as modern mythology for our culture. These are stories that we believe in, that we look at and we think, this is how we should live. You know, we should be like that. Or we look at the Avengers and Marvel or Lord of the Rings. These are the mythic tales that, you know, it's like, now I know who I am. What am I going to do with this? Maybe how can I be a hero? And what is a hero? Somebody who's prepared to sacrifice for a greater cause, especially a cause that improves humanity and that does the right thing, right? I'm curious to just stop there for a second and ask you ladies, what comes to your mind as you're hearing this? Maybe how would you define a mythic tale as it relates to writing and today? Katy, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So for me, mythology, I think, is at its very core a religious story, or a story that people at one time at least partially believed was true. So, for example, the Greek myths, right? That was not just stories about about a melodramatic, group of people who got into all kinds of trouble and did all kinds of quests, but it was a religious story for them. And, a lot of it, a lot of sort of embellishments grew out of that, and it got exaggerated. And I think even as modern day Christians, we still have a lot of myths, right? Because we have our saints, for example, and we tend to exaggerate those stories and add to them and embellish them, right? So they grow into these other things. So I think that the key to a mythic tale would be someone trying to make sense of the universe through religion, right? Or someone trying to find their place in this world that's ruled by God or gods or whatever forces of nature that we have. And I do think we see that in Star Wars and Marvel, right? Star Wars, you got the Force, what this energy that connects everything. That's they can harness and then use to their advantage as well. So I think that that's a key part of Mythic Tales is sort of that religious element that's in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I agree with that. To sort of riff on that with mythology, it's a very broad term within its own. And you and I chatted about that in one of our earlier convos, where it can be creation myths, it can be a cultural identity, story. But in the case, the way that we're using when we reference a mythic tale, we're talking about stuff that's like bigger, often more epic. It involves danger. It could be like Harry Potter or Percy Jackson or I need to read more stories about girl mythic heroes. And that's actually kind of why I'm excited to chat with you ladies, because you probably have or you know about this. Any thoughts from you, Verity, on this sort of thing?
I would say that a mythic tale is any story that embodies. I'm so sorry, my 5-year-old just walked through the door. That any story that involves an element of unbelief or disbelief, that stretches our imagination, that causes us to picture our life differently. It involves an element that is not real in our own reality. And I think any story, it doesn't have to be a whole separate world like Star Wars. It can be much like our life, but it has to include some element that is not present in our everyday experience.
Yeah, it's about pushing growth.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your inner world coming into contact with an outer world or a bigger reality, and you having to decide, what do I do about that? Mm-hmm. You know, I think of like, well, in the ancient myths, you have Hercules and you have Horus going on huge adventures because they're trying to earn a place, or they're trying to save their father, or they're trying to, express that identity that they have, that calling into the world. Luke Skywalker does that. Harry Potter's doing that. Percy Jackson wakes up and finds out that he's God born one day. So what are some of the favorite like heroic stories and movies and novels? And before we chat about some of our own stuff maybe that we're writing or have worked on in the past, but Katy, what are some movies that you really enjoyed, watching along this vein?
So more Mythic Tales. Well, I have to say, I am a huge Ray Harryhausen fan, especially when it comes to Greek myths, because I don't know, CGI just does not compare to that stop motion. There's something about that I just absolutely love. But yeah, I love old Sword and Sandals movies. I kind of wish they would bring them back as a genre and do a lot more of them. So Clash of the Titans, for example. Also things like the Exodus story almost takes on a myth, has a mythological element to it, right?
Mythic content, yeah, exactly.
Mythic content. We have Moses getting banished and then kind of having to discover who he is and then face the Pharaoh, so face the God King, right?
Right.
To rescue his people. And then you have all these sort of big elements of the plagues coming in and that sort of thing. So, I mean, I love that. I actually love the first Thor. I know that's one of the controversial Marvel movies, but I just love the big theatrics of it, sort of the almost corny Shakespeareanness of it. I was not super into superhero movies until I saw the first Thor, and then I was like, I'm all in. That was the point when I had to watch all the Marvel movies was after I saw Thor. And that's a really direct crossover, right? Because that's Norse mythology mixed with, modern pop culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Verity, what do you think?
I'm more drawn to the stories that, this is how I write, so it makes sense that this is how I read and watch too, but drawn to the stories where the characters are less heroic in a traditional sense, they don't have to have bulging muscles, they don't have to get the girl, they can tackle their problems in their life with like, I don't know if you're familiar with Clive Barker's The Thief of Always. Have you, either of you, read that?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
The character, I think he's a 12-year-old boy, but he's tackling his own boredom, which is maybe is not as not as epic, you know, as a big. He's having to be a hero to himself, and then subsequently to other characters as well, but it's much more subtle and facing his own demons rather than trying to conquer the world. And for me, it's easier to relate to that type of a story. Although I do love the Narnia series, obviously, and that whole world of heroes, but it's not the same type of mythology that you're talking about, Katy. I think anyone's a hero if they're able to save others or save themselves in some way. It doesn't, without weapons, with weapons, you know, maybe the weapons of words or faith or anything else. And I think that's what's special about us talking from a Catholic perspective is seeing that you don't have to conquer with an army, a tangible army. You can conquer with belief and faith and human spirit, you know.
And I think, based on our conversation with your book, Hidden, Verity, it's very much the sort of mythic component of your stories. It's not like Hercules and the world is exploding and stuff. It is a more personal kind of story, but the mythic component is that it's incorporating elements that are a little bit larger than life, things you wouldn't ordinarily see, and things that prod a character to live outside of their normal and to redefine what normal then means for them, and to create safety for others and themselves in a new way.
Yep. Something outside of themselves that makes them reevaluate and take a journey they wouldn't have normally taken.
Yeah, no, exactly. This past couple of weeks, last 2 weeks actually, I think, I've been on a reading binge reading Rick Riordan, and I read his, I can't remember the names of the books, but his Viking book, his Egypt book, and I'm already forgetting the other one. Oh, The Trials of Apollo, which is sort of the Percy Jackson variant. And they were so much fun. And now, those are obviously very clearly kind of mythologically based, but really they are more mythic tales. And actually, the one thing that I really enjoyed about all of them, not a single one ended with a hero learning a skill or a sword and then battling their way. It always involved intense effort and the heroes being shattered by the end and digging deeper to survive and make a choice. But they always ended with collaborative, sort of teamwork, and then making a choice or choosing to do something, sometimes even being ridiculous and having something funny happen. It is very middle grade. I think it's in between middle and young adult. And I liked that. I liked that, yes, there's battle involved and stuff, but it didn't always come down to having to punch harder one more time, than the bad guy or the other side.
Yeah, or Sophie from Roald Dahl's BFG. I love that story. Again, giant, but it always a human person, a human child that has to face something larger than life and a problem that she didn't know existed before. And I love to see I love stories about children, seeing there's something about a story with from a child's perspective that's different from an adult's. There's almost like a clarity of mission. I think that children are able to be like single-mindedly pursue their goal without as many like the convolutions.
Well,
yes, the hang-ups that adults sometimes face, or distractions. I like stories that don't involve a love interest. I think that's more rare these days. It seems like there's always a love interest, and there's nothing worse than a heroic guy who always has a hot chick girlfriend that's just like pining for him. That's just Maybe that's
Or
the
that's
trope
his only
conversation, like the
motivation.
trope conversation that we were gonna go towards. But I don't know. Let's get creative here, people. Do we have to see that over and over again? I don't know. Not to say that love interests are bad, of course, because I'm all about the Pride and Prejudice, and yeah, Mr. Darcy, he's a hero of his own. So again, not mythology.
Yeah. Katy, what do you think? What's going on?
Yeah, so just commenting on kind of the love interest thing, since we're going in that direction. Yeah, I don't necessarily like the one dimensional, like the girl who's there to be the prize or the one to just pine. I was reading like the Maze Runner series, which, I mean, that's just dystopian. It does have some mythological elements to it, like they're trying to solve the mystery. That book is a mess. But all the two female characters in that book are both just there to pine over the main character hero, who is, as my husband called him, the default sim. He just looks like you're playing Sims and he's the guy who pops up before you add any customization.
You wonder why the girls like him in the first place, and you're like, there is nothing there. What is this?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry to isolate you, Dominic, in this conversation.
Yeah, and I was thinking too, as you're talking about this, this is not mythology, but it's a good illustration of the point you're making about not fighting the bad guy with your fists necessarily, right? But the book, The Scarlet Pimpernell, right? That book is always, like, every time somebody does a plot summary of that book, I get really mad. Like, my blood boils, because they always get the plot wrong. The plot of that book is not about the Scarlet Pimpernel rescuing people from the French Revolution. The hero of that book is his wife, Margaret, trying to rescue him because he gets basically into trouble trying to rescue other people. And she does not use her fists or anything like that, right? She's a very proper lady who has to use her wit and her cunning and intelligence to rescue both him and her brother by the end of the story. So I was just thinking that that's a perfect example if you want to read a book where somebody just does not do anything physical to save the life of the person she loves, but does everything through kind of her wit and her cunning and intelligence. Scarlet Pimpernel is one you got to read.
Yeah, I'll have to. I've never read that, so I'll have to check that out.
It's fantastic. It's like...
Grew up loving that one.
That
Two stories that are kind of on different places, but especially with girl heroines. One would be like Hunger Games, and then the other one is actually the Odyssey. And I was in college, and we had to write a paper on the Odyssey, and all of a sudden it struck me the heroism of Odysseus's wife. And I really should pull that thing back out and reread it again. But what struck me was there's this phenomenally, how do I say this? It's like a dark and serious role that the women play in a lot of Greek tragedies or Greek sort of stories. And those out there who know these stories better than I do, go ahead and argue with me on this one. But this is a sense that I get, where they are willing or prepared to sacrifice not just themselves, but their identity, their role, and like their happiness, their ability to be anything, to make sure that the right thing happens. There's one Greek play, and I'm drawing a blank on her name, but her brother was, I think, a traitor to the city, and so she is forbidden to bury him, right? And the city declares anybody who buries him is going to be executed. And she's like, well, what do I do? Because the gods demand proper burial rites. And so she knows that if she goes and does what the gods demand, she is going to then suffer his exact same fate. And what happens if the burial rites aren't performed for a person is you become a shade and you sort of wander the world until you wisp away. You don't actually get to go on into whatever their heaven is. And that's why burial rites are critical. And so she is prepared to do that for her brother. She's going to give him those burial rites, and then she will sort of condemn herself to just fade away and be nothing, but she will do the right thing for him. The heroism of that, to kind of forego your eternity, in that story, to me, that's incredibly heroic. Or in the case of, what's her name? The wife of Odysseus. She's facing something very similar like that as well. And she is desperately trying to put off having to marry anybody because she's facing a similar thing. And I'm now drawing a blank on what that is. But there's an incredible heroism with her there. And then you get the other side that is more dramatic. Maybe one could say taking on more stereotypically masculine virtues, perhaps, but there are plenty of women who excel in them. Mm-hmm. And you have Katniss over the course of the whole thing, and she is not only trying to, identifying herself, but she's also challenging the system, and she's challenging the way that things are. So I want to move into sort of the next thought here, and I'm curious what you ladies think.
Yeah, one thing, Dominic, if I might add, just before we change topics real quick, I just wanted to bring up, if you're looking for some female mythological heroes, I would also look to Eastern mythology as well. So the whole way, according to legend, that, for example, Wing Chun Kung Fu got invented was because a woman by the name of Wing Chun had to fight a stronger male opponent, so she had to invent a style of martial arts that would allow her, as a smaller, weaker opponent physically, to use the strength of her male opponent against him. So there's a ton of stuff like that in Eastern mythology, so I'd recommend checking that out as well.
Wow. Beautiful. Yeah. Okay. So talking about them, we're kind of already doing this. So, but what counts as heroism? And a thought that comes about, let's say someone's thinking, I want to write a mythic tale, then what does that mean? What are sort of the parameters? And I'm thinking the sort of thinking about like the latest Spider-Man, right? That came out, or all the Tom Holland fun and stuff. There is personal growth that can happen in a mythic tale, but I think it does not have to, and it usually doesn't involve kind of a spiritual component of, how do I say, like, this maybe is going to get me into heaven, right? There's not that level of thinking. And if we're Catholic, then we're usually just sort of creating characters, or we like to think about that. And we're like, well, is this going to get my character into heaven? And when you're crafting a mythic tale, it's not yet that kind of story. I think it's a step below, where it's more about the heroics, it's about the adventure, and it's more about, there is a problem in society that I think I need to solve. And we end with a good being secured for a society, for a context, right? And so you think of like the heroics of Spider-Man. He's trying to be a good person. Is he absolutely clear on who gets to define goodness? He doesn't end up going into a church at the end of it, because it's not meant to be that kind of story. That's going to be like maybe the next contest that we hold, which is thinking more along those lines. But in this one here, he's got this very clear idea that this is what it means to be good in the world. This is what needs to be done. Here is a problem, or a person who's being a problem, and we need to face this. This is not something to run away from. It is very much, I would imagine, it's a sphere of action. It's a story about taking action. It's not yet a story about learning, maybe, I need to detach from everything. Inactivity can also be a response, right? You first have to learn the activity and the heroism and the competition and the suffering. And, those are things that we have to work through to then grow, so that we are then able to understand things like, well, what mystics and wiser people then tell us is actually really important about life as well. Curious what comes to your mind along those lines. Katy, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, I think I've heard it said, right, that the 10 Commandments are written on the human heart. So I think even if you have a secular hero, they can look at a situation and say, this is wrong, what's happening here, and I got to do whatever I can do to make it right. And you also sort of have that challenge with your mythological heroes, the realization that they can never make everything right. I think that's the common theme that comes up with Superman, right? He's basically omnipotent. He can do everything, but at the end of the day, he can't save every single person. He can't stop every single evil in the world that's happened, and that's something that he has to face, that our mythological hero has to face.
Verity, any thoughts?
It's difficult for me to detach from the idea of not needing personal growth. So,
Well, no, there is personal growth. Maybe it's just, and again, once you start defining anything, someone will be like, well, hey, this story works, and it's got everything that we say is not in it. It's like, well, okay, I know. But you've got to start somewhere and sort of sketch out something to talk about. But go ahead with what you were going to say.
oh no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that maybe I fully agree. I'm not sure if I fully agree.
Disagree.
Go ahead with what you think.
Bring it.
I don't know. Maybe I'm not familiar enough. Like, look, I was about to say that maybe I'm not familiar enough with like historical mythology, right? And maybe the modern sense of mythology isn't quite what it used to be. It's one thing to talk about it removed from the time period. Like removed from that. Like in hindsight, talk about other people's mythology, but talking about our own mythology, and how the modern reader or watcher would view it is like a completely separate thing.
Well, let me throw a couple of other examples that, for example, I think not only qualify as mythology, but also as mythic tales. For example, with England, the stories of King Arthur, that's their mythology.
Right.
And for us, they qualify as mythic tales, or Robin Hood.
Well, see that like right now our culture has this mythology of vampires, right? And the angels and werewolves, and the angels and demons, and that's and I know, Katy, you said before that there's a root in religion in all of this mythology, and so our culture is seeing something that, like vampires and werewolves, are cultural myths, and we can like see ourselves in the tales that people are telling right now, and it tells us a lot about who our culture, who we are as a culture. The way that we're fascinated with vampires now, and it's a culture of death. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but it just that I think the modern person is seeing. I don't know if they're getting the same thing out of mythology as what they used to, or I don't know if they see it, because so many people, they don't believe that vampires and werewolves are real, but that is part of our cultural myth. People don't believe that angels and demons are real. They haven't fully bought into the myth of it all, but they are real, and I don't know. It's. Are you following me at all?
Go ahead, Katy. What do you think?
Yeah, no,
You look like you're itching there.
I was just thinking that's totally valid. I don't necessarily think that you have to fully believe it or believe it at all. So a lot of times in ancient Greek and Roman culture, depending on what era you're looking at specifically, they were very secularized, and they had sort of these tales in the background, right? But they were really more myths to them as well. They would sacrifice to the gods, but it was a cultural thing. They didn't actually believe it. I think we see a lot of that in cultures today that are culturally Catholic, but not actually believing it, right? So you might have like a pretty much, for all intents and purposes, secular household with like Our Lady of Guadalupe on the wall, for example, or they do the first communion parties and the confirmations, but that's it. Then they don't go into a church again for, the next 20 years until they're married, right? So I think that sometimes these religious themes, like, you don't necessarily have to believe them, for example, or they don't, like, when I think of things like vampires, that's like religion, right? Any kind of religion, that's somebody's way of looking at the world, seeing things that they can't explain, and trying to be able to explain them, even if that's a fictional thing in their mind. So we all know that mortality, for example, is something that is just weighs on the secular mind. Like, what does it mean to die? What does it mean? What if we could be immortal? What about vampires, for example, right? That's kind of us trying to contemplate our mortality. What if I could make myself immortal, but it meant I had to, like, become a bloodsucker and couldn't go out in the daylight? Like, would it be worth it? Like, that's kind of like what you see in stories like Twilight, right? So I think you're right that there is some mythological elements. And there's also things like, right, Bigfoot. Does anyone, I mean, some people believe in Bigfoot, but if you go on the internet, some people believe pretty much anything, right? But Bigfoot, the Jersey Devil, the Loch Ness Monster, those are all urban myths or urban legends, right? People kind of say they're true, and part of you wants to believe that they're true, just because it's such a fun, like, extraordinary thing. But then you're, like, the skeptic in you is fighting with the part of you that wants to believe something extraordinary. So I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but
How do you write to a culture that doesn't believe that angels and demons are real? And I'm sorry, coming back to this point, but, like, it's been on my mind a lot. How do you face that and approach that? It's one thing writing about something that you know is mythological, and it's another thing writing about something that people perceive to be mythology, and but is truly real. Do you have I'd be curious.
So I want to share a quick thought on that, and I think it's a great question. I want to throw in, if you can hear my corgi in the background, there's a difference I want to posit between, for this conversation anyway, the merits of mythology versus mythic tales. And mythology as a genre covers all kinds of things. Narnia, just pulls in, like, everything, all of these mythic elements, like you're saying. And we're on a kick right now in creative culture everywhere to be repurposing all of these mythic elements and so on, and just having fun with them. So then the question is, well, if we take our faith seriously, as we, since we love it, how does it inform what we do? And maybe write fiction. And invariably, it's going to keep prodding us to think a little deeper, look below the surface. What is the meaning of a thing, right? So, for example, with Rick Riordan and his big mythic Percy Jackson stories, yes, it's full of Cyclops and it's got harpies in it and gods and so on. That's not actually the point of the story. That's, in a way, that's window dressing. The point of the story is, who is Percy and what is an appropriate response to a great responsibility. That is what I'm just defining as a mythic tale. Katniss Everdeen has that same response. You can track this back through the ancient Greek myths and so on. It's that same response to, like, a call to greatness, whether for women or men or children. So to start responding to your point, Verity, how do you, maybe realistically, or how do you play with mythical elements in a mythic tale? I think a show that does a good job of this is, like, Stranger Things. It really dramatizes the contact with demonic beings, but it does it in a bit of a fantasy way. And the characters are, in a way, they're like these mythic characters. Yes, they're very ordinary people, but they're all faced with these impossible challenges, and they have to overcome themselves, and they've got to band together, and they've got to make the world safe again, make the world right again. There's not yet a discussion about sacramental worldviews and sort of saving everybody. Mm-hmm. Some stories can be like that. And this one's a very mature show, but it's called Evil. And that one is about a pair of exorcists traveling around, and there's a Muslim tech guy, and there's a lapsed Catholic psychologist, and they go around investigating possible cases of possession for Diocese of New York. Like I said, it's a very serious show, but they take a very serious topic. They kind of have fun with it. It's kind of a bit like Catholic fantasy, really. All kinds of people enjoy it, whether they believe the whole Catholic thing or not. It's because the story is really, the story is well told, the story is carefully put together, and it's not trying to, like, teach you something. Mm-hmm. It's trying to show you this is the character's response to what they see as reality. curious where that goes with you ladies. Katy, any follow-ups there?
I'm trying to. So we have been discussing quite a bit here, and there's a couple of things I'm sort of struggling with slash thinking. So the first is, so everything we've been saying about Mythic Tales, how does that differentiate it from straight up fantasy? Because what I'm hearing from our discussion so far is that people basically could just submit a fantasy story and that would qualify. So is there a difference for the purpose of our contest?
Right. So mythic is, as far as the contest goes, right? A mythic tale is a broader kind of umbrella term. Fantasy goes in it, sci-fi goes in it, historical adventure novels go in it, straight up mythical stories go in it. Modern retellings, stories like Verity's Hidden, I would classify in it. It's just a broader term to describe the function of a story. So again, if I'm defining a fairy tale as it's a story about your identity as a person, as a human, and your relationship to the supernatural, say, then a mythic tale is what you do with that identity, how you come in contact with a culture or a problem, and how you live that out. Maybe you change and maybe you don't, but it's often, I think, a mythic tale is going to communicate, here's how we see the world and what it means to be a good person in the world. I'll come back to Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen. The more she comes in contact with the world, the more she rebels against it, because she recognizes my humanity will not accept this. There's a deeper law in my being, and we can call it the Ten Commandments, we can call it, natural law, whatever. That rebels against the fake constraints of that thing. And so the whole story is, well, if that's your problem, it's a very inner problem. What are you going to do about it? And that's why everybody shows up for all 3 movies. And I haven't read the books. 4 movies, I should say. I haven't read the books yet, But it's very much that same with like Harry Potter. It's like, how many movies? 8? He's very quickly recognizing there is a massive problem that I cannot run away from. Who am I? What do I do about that? Is that starting to answer your question, Verity? And Katy, have I started to answer yours?
Yes. Yes, you've answered my question. Yeah. Do you mind if we talk more about female heroes?
Please do.
I would love to see. Maybe I should start with what I don't. Maybe start with something you do like or what you don't like. I don't know. Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. She's a hero, obviously, and she's
one kind of
hero. Yes. I maybe like Catwoman, or the Divergence, Tris Pryor. They're fun to watch. And those types of heroes are fun to read. I feel like they're a product of our culture. Again, I don't know if they're as authentic as I would like them to be. I would love to see more authentic female heroes who are really, truly feminine and great in their femininity. I don't like to see just angry women kicking butt all the time. The books, what did you say? Scarlet
Pimpernell.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping. I would like our culture to move towards. Not that there's anything wrong with a girl kicking butt, but when I see a hero just 10, 12 guys are coming at her and somehow she manages to escape without her hair being messed up.
And she's a quarter of their body mass,
Yeah,
and it's like,
yes.
And she
no
looks
matter
fantastic.
How high her heels are, no matter how high her heels are, doesn't give her this, the superpower to defeat all of them all at once. And I know it's like awesome, right, to see, and our culture wants women to be just as physically powerful as men. But there's nothing wrong with being a woman and acknowledging your femininity and still winning the day. There are other ways, and yes, a lightsaber can go very far. And
So let's keep going with this. I really, this is something where I sort of sit in humility before women to learn what matters for you. And we've got a lot of women in our Catholic author community, which is fantastic. I want to keep going on this. You say there's our modern culture, a lot of modern movies will give us one particular idea of feminine heroism, and it usually comes down to Black Widow or Wonder Woman. I confess those are kind of breaking the stereotype a little, because they do kick butt, but they're also very deeply there's a vulnerability there within both those characters. But to keep pushing that, or keep, how would you, or maybe you've read these kinds of characters who are, confidently feminine, and it still classes for this discussion as a mythic tale, right? I wouldn't classify, for example, Pride and Prejudice as, a mythic tale. It's a different kind of story. And in this one, this is about great epic choices or something like that, or adventure and so on. What are some stories that you've seen, or stories that you would wish to see? And maybe let's move into those tropes then, and just start talking around that.
Stories I would wish to see. Did you have something to say, Katy?
Katy, you want to go on that?
Yeah. So first of all, I agree with Verity. I love the new Wonder Woman movie that came out. I wasn't as big on the 1984 one, but the first one, I was just like, as a female, like, this is the superhero movie I've wanted to see forever, because she's very feminine, she's very strong, but they're not afraid to have her be very feminine, in that she's, and have her be a little bit naive, have her be like a complex character. Because I think that so often, because there's kind of been an outcry against like the damsel in distress, that people overcompensate by making the woman just perfect at everything, whether that's fighting, whether that's being smart. Like, you see a lot of the hero in the movie coming in as the woman who just like knows all the answers, and she's super like fast talking, and that's not really what I wanted to see. I want to see a female character that's complex, whether she's got godlike powers, as in the case of Wonder Woman, or whether she's, an accountant or whatever she happens to be. I think in terms of good examples of women in more epic tales done really well. So there's this Korean drama called Guy Beck, which has... So first of all, I will caveat this by saying I only watched the Korean drama till the center point, because the Korean dramas are very historically accurate, and when I found out how the actual legend ended in real life, I was so angry that I chose to believe that it actually ended halfway through. So you should definitely watch the first half of Guy Beck. But what I will say about that is so the main villain of that show is an evil queen, right? And she is the second wife of this king, so he's got two wives. And the way she uses almost this maternal instinct to manipulate people and to gain power, she doesn't like seduce them like we would see in a lot of movies. Like, you see the woman using her feminine wiles or using sex to get what she wants. That's not what she does. She uses almost this like maternal manipulation, where she becomes so influential over these people that she can literally say to one of her soldiers, "Go kill yourself," and he'll do it. It's just absolutely phenomenal use of seeing a woman come to power without using any physical strength, it being entirely based on a culture and manipulation. And there's also a lot of good female characters in that show as well, who are kind of similar. Like, they use their brains, their smarts. One of them's like a pharmacist, and she has all these like herbs and stuff that she uses, and she's able to kind of organize the people that way. So it's very mythic, and the characters are very very strong and diverse, and each one is an individual, and they don't just have to kick butt all the time to get what they want. So I would say that that's a very good example of a diverse range of female characters in a mythic tale.
If I could also suggest, like, the new Scarlet Witch series, WandaVision, or even Princess Leia. I mean, they're both capable of action, but really the genius of their role within this great mythic context, or even maybe Encanto. What I loved about so much of that movie is there's kind of like heroic action, and there's like these beautiful sort of magic mythical events happening, and I mean the whole context is kind of mythical, but it's not about throwing punches. It's a completely different kind of story, and there's so much more relational, or how do I say it's about, there's like a community component, there's a relationality component, there's an identity component, and it's still the same kind of context of something is wrong that needs to be resolved, and I have to be the one to do it, for example, or I have to step up to this in some way. But it's completely different the way young men or men are called to, maybe soldier through a problem. Mm-hmm. Women don't, it's not the feminine genius to consider it that way. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts along those lines?
Yes, I probably haven't read. I need to get a reading list from you, Katy, I think. Enough of that. I tend to see more of what's in pop culture right now. But yes, I think you're right on, Dominic, about that. And there's this anti-feminine feminism going on right now, and getting back to stories like that, where we really do get to see the way a woman really works, and how just looking like a woman doesn't make you a woman, and it's about what goes on inside, and so much of who we are as women is how we think and how we process, and women writing women. It is, I think, the best way to achieve those authentic female heroes. I think that for a long time there were a lot of men writing women, and maybe sometimes some things became oversimplistic, but not all the time. Obviously, there's some very well fleshed out characters, but
yeah, and I would also say it's important as well to have male heroes similarly use their wits, because not every man is going to be like this, like muscle bound, like Hercules type guy. And even if you can chop your way through a problem, that's probably not the first thing you want to do. I love...
it also makes for boring writing too, just having to punch everything or chop everything. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I love one trend I've seen now, and this is going to be a little bit off genre, but so many people have talked about this kid's cartoon Bluey, and about the dad in that show. If you haven't seen it, you don't have to have kids. My husband and I have actually watched this cartoon after our kids have gone to bed because it's that good. But just the example of a tender masculinity. I think part of the problem, right, when we look at gender as Catholics, for example. So the Catechism says something about that men and women represent the strength and the tenderness of God. Those are not opposites. It takes an incredible amount of strength to be truly tender, and an incredible amount of tenderness to be truly strong. Example that I always bring up is when I had my first daughter, this little tiny baby, she got this bout of colic, and I had very severe postpartum depression. So my husband is sitting there. I couldn't be helpful at all, and he's walking her around, patting her back, singing to her while she's screaming in his ear for 3 hours. And I said, that's masculine strength right there. Mm-hmm. That's how I want to see my men be strong. I don't care if they kill a hydra, right? But to have that kind of ferocious love that's willing to hold on to that child for 3 hours and still manage to be gentle and tender to that child, that is strength I would love to see in my masculine strength. I would love to see in my male characters. So that's what I would kind of add to that as well. Like, we don't have to stick to these romanticized stereotypes for either gender, really.
Yeah, you're right.
Absolutely. It's almost at an hour here, so it's time to start wrapping up. So I would love to invite you both to share a thought, and maybe as it comes out of the stories that you yourselves have written. So we'll get to that in just a second. thanks again for all those who watched. If you enjoyed some of this, please hit like. It does help more people to hear more about Verity and Katy and CatholicAuthor. If you have questions about this, because you've got to have some questions, go ahead and put them in the comments, or maybe ask them in the community. And that's what this interview and why we're hosting these creative convos. It's an insight into the kind of community we're trying to build in Catholic Author. It is a super friendly creative community for the modern Catholic author. It's a place to give and get feedback, share your insights and your works in progress, and build a network of supportive friends, plus a whole lot more. So come and check us out. Maybe join us, CatholicAuthor.us. So in wrapping up, I think we've all had a stab at writing some kind of mythic tale of our own. What would be a parting thought that you would like to leave with folk about how you've enjoyed crafting a mythic tale of a character facing a problem and learning how to overcome it? And I think you've both even crafted heroes that do it in different ways. Katy, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So my main piece of advice would be to read mythology. I mean, go back to the source. So not just, obviously, your Greek myths, your Roman myths, the Western myths, but also look at your Eastern myths, and you can see patterns in the tropes. Because mythology is basically a bunch of cultures always are stealing each other's mythology and adapting it, right? That's just kind of that's kind of how these myths develop. So look for commonalities in that, and also go back to, I always say, go back to the Bible, because the Bible is in itself almost like this huge mythic tale, even though we as Christians believe that it's true, right? But all the mythological elements, including using a combination of wit and strength, and the female heroes in the Bible using their wit, as well as sometimes physical strength to solve whatever problems their culture happens to be facing. So go back to the source material. That's my parting advice.
That's a good one. Verity, what would you like to share?
Along the same lines, but a different twist. But I would say go back to your source material. Go back to the source material that's within your own life, that you write from your own experiences, and allow that to make the hero an authentic hero and a real hero. That's not just a stereotype or a cartoon, but always doing great things, but rooted in your own story.
Exactly. And to kind of speak to both of the things that you've just said there, like when we read the great, beautiful mythic tale that is sacred scripture, we can say, oh, yes, it's true, but it's true on multiple different levels. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's just even like Bible 101 is there are different levels to engaging with sacred scripture. There's a literal level. There's an allegorical level. I'm even drawing a blank. There's an anagogical level. So there's different things that we're meant to look at. Some stories are told that sound literal, but they're preserved because they actually have a metaphorical or a spiritual message, and that's why that story is kept. I'm going to say the same thing about mythology, and actually a lot of the stories that are really popular today. You can watch them in the sort of literal sense of it happened on screen, or these things are written down and happened in mythology. But more often than not, mythology is preserved in our own culture and in the past because it has other levels of meaning. There's an initial level of adventure, like Star Wars, or I don't know, Hunger Games or Wonder Woman. There's that topical level of adventure and action that happens. But we're meant to actually think and go below the surface and sit with that. And what are the psychological truths of how the human mind works, how the human soul works that's going on under the surface? What are the messages about what we think about our culture and what it means to be a good person? That's also going on in the story. All these are different levels of analysis, levels of thinking. So that would be my recommendation. As you're writing your story, yes, you're having fun, and it could be a fan fiction, although we don't really do a lot of fan fiction, but maybe it's like a Legolas kind of character fighting trolls, and there's all this adventure and hoo-ha and fun going on. But the real question is, as you're crafting your mythic tale, step away from the surface and sink below, kind of go deeper. What is going on underneath? What's the message? What makes it mythic? And it's that which I think is is what's trying to set us apart as Catholic authors, is we're fully embracing all the fun that can be had with all the pop fiction elements and so on. But we're also taking it a little bit more seriously than everybody else does, because we recognize that there's real people reading this, and we want to inspire them. And maybe the story is a dark, serious story, but we still want to prompt something a little bit deeper to help make lives a little better. So thanks again, ladies, for joining us. Katy, Verity, wonderful to have you with us. For those who enjoyed this, again, if you didn't hit that like button, please hit that now. Share this with somebody that you think would enjoy this. Come and check us out at CatholicAuthor.us. Subscribe to the channel, join the email list, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And please do check out Verity's book and Katy's books. They're both active in the community and writing on the blog, at least Katy is. So check out their interviews. We'll link to those in the show notes. Thanks again, everybody. Wonderful to spend the time with you. Till next time, keep writing.
Bye-bye.